We're supposed to start at 6:30, right?
If you want to just do a quick introduction and then you can get started whenever you're ready.
Sure. So my name's Tony Alfonso. I'm a registered nurse and I'm the simulation director at Western Dakota Tech College. I just recently left the Air Force. I had spent 20 years in the military, and prior to that, I was working for the Indian Health Service. So I spent about 8 years working on reservation land and up in Alaska. I was asked to do this presentation because my parents came from Colombia, and Spanish is the first language that I spoke, with my first words. Aprendí a hablar en inglés cuando era joven y cuando yo fui a la escuela tuve problemas hablando en inglés, pero después de un rato pude hablar. I just said when I was young I spoke only Spanish, but when I went to school it took me a little while, but I figured it out. So I've been asked to give this briefing, and I'm going to just stand by. Caitlin, do you want me to just fold off there or keep on going?
You can keep going.
Okay, so I've been asked to give this briefing, and the original intention was for me to give a little bit of an explanation of how to communicate with Spanish speakers. And after doing a review of the literature and just getting a little bit of information, I want to see if I can go ahead and make a bargain with you guys and have you just hang out and listen to me about something besides Spanish. What I have up on the chart right now is a multitude of different languages that I've been exposed to. You could see in the column under country the name of the country the language comes from. And in the next column, you could see how that language is actually written. In the Native American languages, I don't have samples of the languages and how they actually said hello, but I'm just giving you an example of how, like in Hopi, you would say hello in that language, or Navajo, Yate, or Yupik, Watka. But you can see that there's different ways they actually said it. And whenever I was talking to my Navajo friends and we were walking down the street and they would see one of their friends, they go, Yate! So it wasn't just say they Yate. That's like an English way of saying it. It's Yate! When you're talking to somebody that's Yupik, it's Watka. So it's when you hear the language, we Americanize how we speak because that's what we've been exposed to. One of the first things I learned when I was working with the Vietnamese culture was the Vietnamese alphabet, and I discovered they were missing two letters. But I also discovered they had a completely different way of saying the alphabet than what I was exposed to. And as a result, that really tutored me on how to say the words when I spoke to them. But there's a really important reason why I'm saying this to you, and I'm going to just say right here, if you just came to learn how to speak Spanish, here's your slide. That first thing is YouTube. You could follow her. It's free. She'll teach you a lot of Spanish. She's a very energetic young lady, and there's some medical terms that you could learn out there too. And have fun and good luck to you, but I don't think you're going to get what you need to get. And the reason why I'm saying that is because there's danger ahead. If you just think that this is going to be enough, you're going to have problems. And I'm not saying that you personally will have problems, and God, I hope you don't. But there's real problems to what can happen. As I said, language is peculiar. Now, talking to your loved ones, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, your siblings, that not only how you say a word, excuse me, not only what you say, but how you say it has specific and peculiar meaning. And the way you process that is presented in a form of a fabric, if you will, that weaves a communication between the two or more individuals that are in the process of exchanging information through sound and through body language. You simply can't get that in an academic environment. You have to actually experience it in that country. If you were born and raised in another culture in another country, you know that when you hear the way a word is sound, I remember very clearly when I was a young man hearing my father say Antonio Javier venga aquí, which means Tony Alfonso, come over here. But what I was hearing was Antonio Javier venga aquí, which meant Tony Alfonso, get your butt over here right now because you are in big trouble. You don't pick that up so easily by a textbook. Okay, it's something that you have to actually experience, or you need to get a trusted person that's going to be able to do that communication for you. And now, the reason why I'm saying that, if you need a little bit more convincing, There was a case where a young man, about 19 years old, was on his way to his girlfriend's house, and he felt this driving pain in his head, like somebody was sending a screw or a nail right through his head. And he had enough presence of mind, he made it to his girlfriend's house before he lost consciousness. And in the absence of information, people make assumptions. It's one of the things that we do. So his family, his girlfriend's family, saw him down on the ground. His girlfriend's mother knew that he had recently eaten at a new restaurant and decided it must be food poisoning. Because what's going to knock a 19-year-old kid down to the ground and being unresponsive? You got to make sense of what you're seeing. So what she was thinking she had seen was a case where he had food poisoning. So she reported to the paramedics, "Estás intoxicado," and they heard "intoxicado" in the form of intoxicated. And as a result of that word, that interaction, they believed that they were dealing with an intoxicated young man. And how many 19-year-olds, how many people here were 19-year-old and got exposed to a little bit of alcohol and might have passed out? It never happened to you guys. You guys are in good colleges and come from good families, right? Right? Yeah. Well, in this case, unfortunately, what happened is that this person's care, he had a delay in care as a result of hematoma that he had developing inside of his brain caused enough significant damage that he became a quadriplegic. As a result of a miscommunication, somebody thought they knew enough. Intoxicado. It means intoxicated in Spanish too. But it also has another meaning. It means poisoning. So the paramedic didn't pick it up. The adrenaline is flowing. And when you get those catecholamines rolling through your body, what happens? You get nervous. Your blood pressure goes up. Your respiratory rate goes up. You are in fight or flight. You need to act now. This person's doing stuff and you're going to react accordingly. Because even an intoxicated person can go into respiratory distress or respiratory arrest. So it's appropriate for somebody to deal with that case as it's an emergency. Unfortunately, it was the wrong one. And this person got railroaded in his thinking into what was going on. So now, I want you to think about that for a second and then also think about the law. The law actually requires, this federal law, there's 3 examples here, A, B, and C, where you can see the law actually states that we need to provide, as healthcare people, we need to provide non-English speakers a form for communication. In addition to that, some states, in this case California, has its own law where it's more restrictive than the federal law. So when you're practicing and you're running into that situation that you need to provide somebody the ability to communicate, be aware that your state has specific laws. And to be honest with you, in my putting this together, I did not look into the state of South Dakota. I do know that the state of South Dakota still falls under federal, so the first 3 do apply. I just didn't check what laws are here that apply as far as the state goes, and I apologize for not having that information. But I want to go on a little bit further. I want to talk about the art of communication itself, because there's multiple different forms of communication, and I know the font on this is really tiny and you probably can't read it. I apologize. But when you're dealing with human communication, there's going to be, as I said, there's three pieces in communication. You have the sender, you have the receiver, at least one of each, and then you have the message itself. Now, how that message is transmitted is the responsibility of the sender. And I can tell you my ex-girlfriend would tell me that my communication wasn't that good, which is why she's my ex. But that's a piece. It's a huge piece. And some people have to think about what they're saying so that they can speak in clear terms to go ahead and communicate the message that they're trying to send out. Then that message needs to be received and it needs to be processed correctly. But when you're dealing with people with processing, how they receive communication, and this is on a biological level, a neurological level, how they receive communication, is like if I was to ask Caitlin, we're sitting at the table, And I say, Caitlin, can you pass me the fork, please? And she looks down at the fork and she knows that she can reach it. She knows she can reach to me and she could reach over and that fork would definitely be delivered. She could, yeah, I could definitely pass you that fork. She's not saying, yeah, I could pass you the fork if I felt like it. She heard me saying, do you think that between our distances, is the fork going to be deliverable if you picked it up and tried to get it to me? But what I was saying was, Caitlin, please pass me the fork. So we have different ways of processing information, and that needs to be appreciated, not just on the sender's end, but on the receiver's end as well, because eventually the receiver is going to become the sender of communication too. And let me throw you another little hazard in this. The idea of biology and feeling defensive. Now, I already told you earlier that that paramedic in that situation was seeing a bad scene and he said to himself, I gotta act, this person could go into respiratory arrest. He probably tried to intubate him, go ahead and secure the airway, probably tried to start a line figuring this guy was going to need to get filled up with fluids because he's got too much alcohol on board and wants to dilute it down. He was already thinking through that algorithm and trying to get all this stuff done very quickly. What is it? You need to be at a scene for 10 minutes. And if you're at the scene for greater than 10 minutes, you've been there too long. So he's already telling himself, I want to get in this scene and out in 5 minutes and be on that ambulance and gone. So his energy towards trying to get something done caused himself to have his own little adrenaline rush. Meanwhile, the family's got their own adrenaline rush. How does this affect communication? How do you think that you would be responding if you were in fight or flight and somebody's trying to give you the codes to the nuclear bomb so it doesn't blow up the city? It's kind of hard. You've got to actually slow yourself down. So I want to introduce another concept to you here. In every single emergency you're going to ever be involved with, in every single time, and I mean in your own human life as well, there's this beautiful line that I read in this book I read a long time ago called The House of God. In case of emergency, the first pulse you check is your own. You got to calm yourself down. You've got to be able to process. You got to use that wonderful tool you got between your ears. It's the best piece of equipment you've got. And if you are not going to use it because you're going to let your biology take control, you will lose. I guarantee you will lose, but somebody else might lose too. So check yourself, keep that under control. But what you need to also understand is the patient's feeling it too. Okay? Now this is just giving a little bit of fight or flight. I think that we've all been exposed to this information before, so I'm not going to harp on it. But I am going to just simply try to tell you, now you've got at least two agents in fight or flight mode. You've got the healthcare provider, if they've lost their cool, and you've got the patient who's going to definitely be in fight or flight mode unless they're completely objective and say, yes, I think I'm having an ST elevation because there's definitely a left anterior descending clog in my arteries and I'm going to die in about 30 minutes unless you get me to the hospital and put me into the cath lab so they can break this thing open. So hop to it. It doesn't work like that. They're going to be nervous, they're going to be scared, they're going to be sweating, and all that stuff is going to be right there in front of you, so you've got to be able to process it. But this is about language. Why am I talking about this stuff? Because this is the biology of the human being. This is the physiology of the human being. I'm going to throw another two concepts at you. One is called nosocomophobia, which is fear of hospitals, and white coat syndrome. They're two separate items, but they're almost the same thing. A lot of people have fear of the hospitals. Richard Nixon was documented as saying, when he had a blood clot and could have died from it, get me the hell out of here. These people are going to kill me. The President of the United States of America, you think that, Richard Nixon, yeah, he's a crooked guy and had some problems. But let's face it, he wasn't that stupid. But he was here. Okay? He had the world's best advisors all around him. And what was he doing? Having a panic attack and demanding to get out of the hospital because he was certain those people were going to kill him. White coat hypertension, that's an increase in blood pressure. It's an increase in anxiety. Are they the same thing? Studies in literature are out there. I didn't spend too much time reading about it, but I'm going to just refer to them both as anxiety, and it could be an anxiety disorder. And anxiety compounded on top of an anxiety disorder is what? A panic attack. So once again, you're dealing with somebody that's speaking not your language. Maybe they've been in this country for 5 years and they have enough language that they could deliver the pizza to the right address. But now They're panicking. They've gone back to being 10 years old and they can't speak English anymore because they forgot how, because they're down to their primitive ability to communicate. And what are you going to do? In case of emergency, the first pulse you check is your own. I
Your
can't
own.
hear I can't hear you guys, but I can see your lips moving. I want to see you guys say that and remind your friends. In case of emergency, the first pulse you check is
Your own.
exactly, exactly, precisely. Remember that. And in case of emergency, you're going to forget. And then you're going to remember I said this later. And then you're going to reach behind you in the back of your head and you're going to be like, boom, I'm not going to do that again. In case of emergency, the first pulse you check is your own. Patient's going to be as calm as you are. Excuse me, as calm as you have to be is what's going to be bringing that patient down so they can actually get to the point that they can communicate. Now let me get back to the language barriers. English to Spanish, we identified there's three inherent language discordant communications. And this is not just in English and Spanish, it's just that the writer of this particular document had stated that, which is the language and culture are inextricably linked. You can't take them away from each other. Us Colombians are different than Puerto Ricans. We're different than Hondurans. We're different cultures. We have a different way of communication. I can guarantee you I can't keep up with the Puerto Rican in a bad mood. I can't. They're going to just outspeak me and I'm going to be like, slow down. Even though I can speak Spanish, even though I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household. Second thing, relationship building. And this is the big deal about translators. You can have an exquisitely well-trained translator, but if they don't build a relationship with this person and do that thing I was telling you earlier about the first pulse you check is your own, they could actually bring up their anxiety level. And that could actually mess up the communication that you as healthcare people. I'm assuming all you guys want to grow up and be doctors and nurses and stuff like that. Am I wrong? Who wants to grow up and be a doctor here? All right. Who wants to grow up and be the greatest doctor in the world? Everybody raise your freaking hand. You damn well better be the best. All right. I want you to remember that when you're dealing with your translators, and I dealt with a lot of translators, if they get their emotions involved with that communication, it's going to affect what they're hearing. Okay? So that translator that you're using in the healthcare environment needs to build up a relationship with that patient, which they might have met for the first time or they might have known for the last 30 years, and the healthcare provider. There should be drills and training where this actually occurs. The first time these people meet should not be during the middle of a code where they're trying to get crucial information from a screaming mom whose kid just finished ingesting a whole bunch of iron pills and the doctor needs to act right now before that kid's going to die. Okay? So the idea of the importance of your translator can't be understated. So when you go to your healthcare institution, whether you're working as an EMT, registered nurse, or you're the doctor, make sure that you build that relationship up with that translator. Have that communication, because what's going to happen as a result of it, just like with your friends and family, you guys are going to start picking up each other's vibes. You're going to know how this person communicates because they're communicating with you. And this is going to be crucial and helpful information later on when you're in an emergency and you're trying to sort out, is it the translator or is it the patient? What am I really dealing with here? Does that make sense? All right, so now how many people still want to just learn Spanish and think you're done? Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more complicated. Now, as I said here, if you trust your translator alone, it's going to be a pretty rocky road. You're going to end up with a situation where you're just not going to be sure of what they're saying, and I think I've just beaten that discussion to death. I've already talked about the relationship building. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself with my slides. There's a lot of information on these slides. I don't expect you to read it, but I just finished going over it. But once again, I'm going to just really drill in. When you're dealing with your translator, get to know them. Buy some coffee. If they're into some sport that you're into or some hobby that you're into, or they're not, get to know them anyway so that the first time you meet them in a stressful situation won't be the first time you meet them. Okay? Now, what the non-English speaking patient can expect, they're going to be in that healthcare arena longer. they're going to have a loss of privacy that's greater than your non-English speakers. There's going to be a lack of connection between the provider and the patient. And they're going to have a lot of difficulty navigating the facility because there's going to be different terms and different policies and procedures than what they've seen in their home country. If they've been in America for a while, like for example, my mother, she's Colombian, as I said, my stepfather is Cuban, and they've been in America for a long time. My stepfather's actually dealing with Alzheimer's disease right now, and he's regressing back to a point where he's back in Cuba. His experience of the healthcare world is a lot different than it is in America. I don't care what you've heard about Cuba and how nice it is. I can tell you it's not that nice. And what we have here in America is very good by comparison. But remember earlier, they've got the fight or flight stuff going on. They've got the inability to communicate. And now I've just finished introducing a new problem, which is an altered mental status because of a biological situation. So it gets fairly complex. The other issues that I raised here was the longer appointment times. This is because of waiting on the translator and just because everything's going to slow down for this person. And you as healthcare people want it to slow down. You do. You want to be this patient's advocate. And you're not going to be able to do that if you're not going to be able to actually reach out to them and let them know from the whites in your eyes that you actually care. There's a lot of times when I was dealing with somebody, especially when I was living up on the reservations, that they knew I didn't speak English. They spent the last, a lot of these people, like the older ones that I met, they were pushing 100 years old. So they saw a whole lot of history in America that we ain't that proud of, and they don't trust us. And if you know anything about Indian schools in America, and a lot of these people went to Indian schools, they really don't trust us. Okay? So now you come and you're trying to talk with these people and you're trying to give them some therapeutic environment. It's going to require you're actually getting involved with them. And I know that they're not going to understand you. They're not going to be able to understand the words coming out of your mouth, and you're not going to be able to understand the words coming out of their. But there's adjuncts you can use. For example, I'm going to put something up here on the screen, and you've got a link to this. It's on the presentation. But what this is just an adjunct document which has a multitude of pictures. And these pictures are useful for somebody to communicate with. I strongly advise you that if you have a person that doesn't speak the language, don't give them yours. It's going to be their communicator, if you will. And what you should do is make a photocopy of it and give that to them. You'll see that they're actually scribbling on it, writing down notes, because they're actually going to be processing the information because they desperately want to communicate. You have to remember, hospitals suck. Healthcare sucks. And I don't mean that what we do for a living sucks. But when do you go to the hospital? Right after your birthday party because you want to hang out with folks? You want to have them sing happy birthday to you? No! You're there because you got that broken arm. You were just in a car accident. Grandma just had a stroke. The only time you ever go to a healthcare world is when something in your life has been interrupted to the point that you have to report to some healthcare person. They don't want to be there, and they want to get out as soon as they can. But in their interest of getting out, they might actually want to get some information. So having an adjunct like this is very valuable. And what you also want to do is when you're dealing with them, as I've been beating up over the head, and I hope you're convinced, get a proper language assistant. You have to use an interpreter. You really need that. They're not going to want to ask questions. They're going to wait for you to leave because they don't want to look like an idiot. They don't want to go through this anxiety-provoking process of getting information from you. They'd rather ask their family. And I can tell you, growing up in a Spanish-speaking household, a couple of memorable experiences I had was one where the doctor had said a number of things to my mother, and it was about me. And she had looked at me and said, "What did the doctor say?" Now, in my vast medical knowledge and healthcare training at 8 years old, I don't think I was much use to her. But you'll actually find that a lot of people that are young, that are first generation Americans, actually go through this process where somebody's actually being asking them to do the translating, or the family member is going to ask them to translate for the doctor later. Meanwhile, in front of the doctor, they're going to be like, "Do you understand?" That's a phrase they understand. And what's the first thing they're going to say? Yup. So you as healthcare folks need to actually have a low threshold of suspicion that these folks do not understand. You need to ask probing questions. And I know it's difficult because you don't speak the language, and you might be trusting a translator that might be distracted with their own things, but you need to actually be that patient's advocate. So earlier I said, these people's time in healthcare is going to be a lot slower. I don't want you to hear that and think, well, I need to speed it up. No. What your goal should be is to make sure that the communications that you have as healthcare people are accurate. And when they say something to that translator, you need to make sure that you understood what the heck they said. And if you don't, well, then you didn't understand. And you need to go back and make sure that you have an understanding. And if you still don't, and the translator's not working, then get another translator. Yeah, they might be in a hurry to get out. Got it. And you might have to document the patient left AMA. Got it. But as a healthcare person, you are there to make sure that you're their advocate. I can go to you about the legal stuff I did earlier, and I could talk to you about liability for healthcare. I'm not going to do that because, frankly, I don't care about that perspective. You want to think about it, you can go ahead and use your own imagination, but I'm just telling you, you're not going to spend 8 years in high school wondering where you're going to get to college, 4 years in college, and then another 4 years in medical school, and another 4 years in residency, telling yourself all that time you don't care. You do care. And I want you to remember that, especially when the push comes to shove. Be ready to shove. Okay? Now, another piece here, it's the final slide, is just saying, unless you're thoroughly proficient in another language. This first line is the reason why I wanted to keep this. Unless you're thoroughly proficient in another language, and I'm going to say culture too, get an interpreter. I guarantee you, I will not be the Spanish-speaking interpreter for any doctor. I ask enough questions that I understand what's going on, but I myself am not going to be that person. I'm not assassinating my character and my abilities, but I'm just saying, if I'm dealing with somebody from another country that is not the country of my parents' origin, my ability to understand their culture has dropped significantly. So the ability to understand it requires some training. It requires a lot of exposure. Okay? So I'm not assassinating myself, but I just want you to know that I have that much humility that I'm going to go ahead and look for somebody else. Now, on this final slide, I have a couple of items that might be of interest to you, some things you might have already seen. You've got the paid services, which are just basically just your facility that you work for should have a paid service, so you could just dial that 1-800 number. You've got the facility translator. There's Google Translate, which is a wonderful device. There's MediBabble, and you can actually download this app and put it on your cell phone tonight. It's got the ability for Spanish right now and a couple of other languages, but they're actually throwing in Russian and Asian and a few other languages. It's actually something that's blowing up. The item that I showed you on the screen earlier, this quick point, that is the final link here. So that you can go ahead and purchase one of these things. It'll cost you about 20 bucks. Fold it up, put it inside of your bag of tricks so that it's going to be there when you need it. And the final slide is just a list of citations of how I got this. So if you want to take a look at any of the information I've got, tell me where I went wrong. I'd be grateful for the feedback. And finally, do you have any questions for me? This is where you unmute. And just tell me I did a great job because, you're so impressed.
That was pretty beast. I think you're a good communicator. Thank you for sharing. I did have a question though. When I imagine you've been in a situation where there have been some discrepancies in communicating, right?
Yes.
Language wise. What
Yes.
Aside from what did you think in the moment? Because a lot of times it's kind of like you freeze maybe, when something like that happens? Like, how would you address something like that?
Well, there's always going to be mistakes in healthcare. There's a reason why we have liability insurance. Um, as far as and they call it the practice of medicine for a reason. It's you're never perfected with
Hmm.
this art. It's truly an art. Um, Mistakes that I've seen, I'm scratching the back of my head for a good example of a language mistake, and one will come to me. But while I'm thinking about that, I'm going to just tell you a story that I witnessed, which has nothing to do with language. Which was
Hmm.
I was on the Hopi reservation. We had a uh, high population of people that suffered from that triad you have from diabetes, which is you get your hypertension and you get your erythrosclerosis, and you just get a higher chance of claudication. A gentleman came in and he was symptomatic for having had a CVA. And I remember it was change of shift, and I had just walked in, so I had fresh eyes. And I remember everybody was walking around this guy, and I remember the doc walking around, just kind of lifting up his arm and dropping it down, just basically establishing that he had a massive CVA, and there was nothing she could do for him. And I asked myself, did anybody check a blood sugar on this guy? So I scurried over, got the
Hmm.
glucometer, and I checked his blood sugar, and it came back LO. That does not mean hello. So I immediately alerted the doc. He had started an IV on him, and we recovered him. And I was absolutely furious with that provider. Um, she was she's a great provider. Don't get me wrong, but she was a little bit off that day. What bothered me about it was the lack of an algorithm or the lack of attendance to an algorithm. Back in the day, it used to be
Hmm.
airway, breathing, circulation. I don't know if any of you guys have taken any advanced trauma life support training, but they actually go beyond A, B, C, D, E. Now it's airway, breathing, circulation, disability, dysfunction, expose. And each one of those things is something, well, in advanced trauma life support is something you do twice, something immediately to fix the problems that you're going to see that you could fix immediately, and then you have to do it again for the more nuanced assessment. Um, she abandoned that for that day. I don't know why. Um, she had an off moment. Somebody put her on a track, um, and it's something that happens. And that specifically is the story I was thinking about when I was reading the Ramirez case, because the mistakes can happen anywhere. In her case, it was a delay in care which did not yield a negative outcome, but it could have. It could have killed that guy. And once again, we're on a reservation. The predominant language is a mixture between Navajo, Hopi, Apache, and English. And there's a lot of people that speak English primarily, but then you get tripped up with these folks where they're doing this, the Native American version of what I used to call Spanglish, where it's just a combination of languages, and people don't even know that they're doing it, but it's the way they communicate. So
Hmm.
there, I'm just telling you, the world that we live in, it's fraught for the potential for issues. Um, how you feel about it, though, that was what your question was. You asked me about the mistake, and then you asked me how I felt about it. I
Yeah,
remember I was furious with that doctor. I remember, in case of emergency, the first pulse you check is
your own.
exactly. I was not the star of the show. The hypoglycemic diabetic on the bed was the star of the show. Okay? That's the orientation that I needed to keep that day, and it's the orientation I need to keep every single time. I've seen people make
I
mistakes
see.
with medications where they've over medicated somebody. I heard of a case. I was present on the floor, but not in the room, where somebody mixed up somebody's feeding tube and their PIC line, and they ended up giving them 2 units of blood
Oh,
into their digestive system. And I can tell you, blood makes one hell of a cathartic. I mean, shit can actually travel across the room about 6 to 10 feet and splatter with velocity onto the wall. It's really exciting. She sat there knowing that she had connected that tubing to that patient and did not believe that as a nurse practitioner, she could have made that mistake.
huh.
Obviously, she did. We had evidence, it was on the wall. But it took her a while to process that she made a mistake. Once again, the star of the show that day was the burn patient on the bed that was still had a low hematocrit and hemoglobin, and we still needed to address that along with this new bowel problem. Um, and that's the focus that we had that day was going back to the patient. The focus that thankfully I had on my day was going back to the patient. And that's the one that I'm going to recommend that you keep. How I felt, you can't help feeling. You can't help when you see things. When you see a rape case, when you see a badly beaten human being, when you see a mangled up child, you will feel things. Keep that in check. You're not there to feel things. You are there to take care of them, and you could feel your stuff afterwards. That's what the purpose of the debriefing is. Okay?
Yeah.
So, I can't, I'm sorry, I'm using fairly strong pictures to communicate something because you will be there. I mean, when I wore a uniform, I took care of people that honestly wanted to kill me. I never saw the whites of their eyes because they were all blindfolded. And I delivered the best care I could to these people. But there was a reason why they were chained to their beds. They wanted to kill me. A few days before, they were actually killing people wearing uniforms just like mine. How did I feel? They were still the star of the case. They were on
Yeah.
that bed. It was my job to take care of them. So maintain that orientation. And never forget airway, breathing, circulation, disability, dysfunction, expose. You won't go wrong. I mean, I can tell you in multitudes of emergencies, I don't usually go all the way down the alphabet, but you'll actually see me in a code saying to myself, airway, is it under control? Breathing, is it under control? When I'm dealing with people with a language disability or there's some kind of a deficit in communication, there's this crazy idea that they developed in nursing schools, which was this thing called nursing theory. And I'm not putting down nursing theorists, but I just wish that they wouldn't take themselves so seriously. However, there's a nursing theorist by the name of Oram who was very systematic in her approach, where she was looking at people from the standpoint that everybody wants to take care of themselves, and they're either able to do it or they have some kind of a self-care deficit. And there's primary things like being able to breathe, all the way up to being able to, go on into your life and be successful on a more cerebral standpoint. It kind of superimposes the concept of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it breaks it down to basic elements. And when I was dealing with my CVA cases, I used to use Oram as my go-to. Honestly, it was my go-to because it gave me an algorithm. It gave me a method for how to deal with those cases. And I strongly encourage that you identify your algorithm, and it has to be scientifically based. You just can't pull up the Micah case. Logan, you're a smart
Right.
guy. I love you, but I haven't seen your studies yet. It hasn't been double-blind studied. So get yourself a good theorist and attach yourself to that theorist and understand them inside out and be able to use that theorist, because when the S hits the F, and eventually it will for you, it will. It's gonna happen. You need to attach yourself to something. When I was in the military, they used to say we had to train all the time because we fight like we train and we train like we fight. And in the healthcare world, it's no different. You're just not fighting with bullets and guns and knives and things like that. You're fighting with healthcare, and I love you. So go out there and show it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Now I thank you for you guys' time as well.
Stopped recording. Whoops. Handful of phrases in Spanish that you feel would be good for us to just know to just start beginning out. Which ones would you pick that we could?
You're all students, so you all want to be doctors, right? So you can't say yo soy un doctor. Hola, me llamo Catalina. Soy estudiante doctor, because you're a
Yes.
student doctor, estudiante
Mhm.
doctor. Estoy estudiando para ser un doctor, y um, I'm studying to be a doctor. Estoy estudiando para ser un doctor, or soy un doctor. Let them know who you are. let them know your name. Because every single time you walk into a room, a lot of these cultures, I mean, they're not as primitive as they used to be. It's not like every single female walking into a room in South America is all nurses and bedpan commandos and only men are doctors. Still, a lot of it works that way, though. It still works that way in Asia, but still there's a lot of really smart doctors in Asia, too, and Africa. So what I want you to do is just make sure that you be able to communicate who you are and what you are to them. And so, hola, me llamo, and you say your own name. Soy un doctor. Soy un doctor. Like soy sauce, but not exactly the same thing. Soy un doctor. Okay? Let me hear you say that piece. Soy un doctor.
Soy un doctor.
You guys can say it all at the same time. I'm kind of get impressed by that.
Soy un doctor.
Okay.
Soy un doctor.
All right, you're not going to be able to, you need to do something about 60 times before it actually becomes a portion of your brain, okay? When you actually, neurologists have actually proven, and it's one of these stupid tricks that I heard, if you like this, and you like do this, like, you know, you got your thumb up here, and you want to transition so that the thumb's up over here and the finger's out over there, it's really hard. But if you do that about 60 times a day for a week or so, you've actually built an engine inside of your brain that's going to be able to do that. So start saying it now. You're going to be saying it in a few years anyway. Soy un doctor. Say it.
Soy un doctor.
Yeah, say it with confidence, man.
Soy un doctor.
All right, Caitlin, you're doing the back here.
Soy un doctor.
Okay. All right. All right. Hola, me llamo. Hello, my name is. Hola, me llamo. And you fill in your own name.
Hola, me llamo Micah.
Okay.
Hola, me llamo Caitlin.
Okay. Kyle, you're being all muted there.
Hola, me llamo Kyle.
Okay. Okay. Now, another phrase is, and this is kind of difficult because once you do this one, you're opening up the Pandora's box. It's going to be blowing up in front of you. It's going to be like a tidal wave coming. It's going to be the tsunami, okay? ¿En qué puedo servirle? How can I help you? ¿En qué puedo servirle? Okay? En, like the letter N. ¿Qué puedo? That's a little bit more. It's a few more syllables. And then that last arm one. Servirle. ¿En qué puedo servirle? All right, let's just break it down. Servirle. Go ahead and say that.
Servirle.
Servirle.
Servirle. Go ahead, say it again.
Servirle.
Servirle.
Servirle. It's kind of difficult, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
All right. ¿En qué puedo?
¿Qué puedo?
No. ¿En qué puedo?
En qué puedo.
¿En qué puedo servirle?
En qué puedo servirle.
Perfecto. Okay? And that's actually a good one too. Positive feedback is huge. Even if you don't understand everything they're saying, and you'll see me doing it a lot, like a lot of these public speakers that do it, they'll do it with the audience, and I actually do it a lot with people. When people do something right, give them some positive feedback because it's actually going to decrease their anxiety. So the word I just used was perfecto, okay? But you got to say it like you mean it. Perfecto, all right? It's like, yeah, Dad, I did that one right, thanks. But, all right, so let's hear you say it. Perfecto.
Perfecto.
Okay. So that is perfecto, okay? Caitlin, can you email everybody the document that I sent you with has a human anatomy on it?
Yeah, they got that earlier today. I sent that.
Okay, great. All right.
Sweet.
All right. So you're going to go practice this. You're going to go to your languages and you're going to do your stuff. You're going to get met with somebody that's going to be a really big pain in the neck for you. When that emergency happens, you're going to meet yourself. And you may not like who you meet. Train yourself. Train yourself. So that when that happens, these little phrases that I taught you and the more that you're going to pick up are going to actually be there for you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I can't give you that. I can't give you the time that you're going to, like I said, 60 times just to do that stupid thing, which I still can't do. I mean, it's like 60 times a day. That's about, what, 2 minutes, maybe 10 minutes for me to do that. And then you're down to 2 minutes, and then you're down to do it in like a minute because it becomes a habit. That's something
Mhm.
fighter pilots figured out a long time ago. That's where I picked that up and just a lecture that I had heard. So I gave you a couple of simple phrases. They're dumb, they are accurate, they're helpful, but they're dumb in the sense that they're not going to be there for you if you don't practice them. And download those apps and get an algorithm. Attach yourself to a theorist. I can't tell you how strongly I feel about that. Attach yourself
Mhm.
to a good theorist that's going to be able to guide you when the S hits the F. And it will. It definitely will. Okay?
All right.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. I know that you guys are all hungry for dinner or something, and I got a pizza waiting on me. So I'm going to let you
Heck
guys
yeah.
go and have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony.
All right, thank
Other members, if you guys could stay, and then we can let Tony go, but I just have some updates for you guys.
All right. Let me see if I can figure out a
All
sign.
right.
If you
Hey,
go,
my computer is gonna like restart here in like a minute. I don't know why it decided to. So if I pop out, that's why.
that's just true rejection. Okay, so updates. One is we might have ASL on April 20th. I will guys keep you guys in the loop. She should definitely come. When she came the last time, she talked about her story. This time she's coming with some ideas for like name identifying things, because I guess in the deaf community they do certain like actions and it means a certain name, and that's specifically to you. So that's pretty cool. I am getting one, and hopefully if you guys want one, you can ask her and she'll come up with one for you. Otherwise, we're learning things. We learned how to say emergency's coming, which is literally like shaking your fist and do this and helping you. So she'll probably review that and teach you guys. So that's April 20th. April 27th, I believe that's a Sunday, in the afternoon, or no, April 25th. I don't know dates. April 25th is a Sunday. That's the afternoon. We're going to have some CPR AED training. You can either get your first certification or you can recertify if you need to do that. And then elections, nominations are going to be due probably within the next 24 hours. And I'll email everybody who's been nominated, and I will send you guys to like tell you what you've been nominated for, and then be like, oh, send me a blurb, and then we'll do an electronic election that I'll just send out as a Google poll on the 17th. I think that is all the updates. For any incoming officers, no, we will have an officer transition meeting because you probably want to know what's happening rather than being
Yeah.
abandoned and sad. So, any questions?
Sounds like you got it all under control.
Heck yeah,
Jesse.
that's my life.
Heck yeah.
If you guys ever want to practice Spanish, hit me up. I speak Spanish, so if you want to see spelling of some of the sentences, it's in the chat. But yeah, that's all. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you don't, you are welcome to leave.